This is a work by an artist who is known to the denizens of Hollywood as Gonzo. And so Gonzo is an artist primarily working in Southern California, again in Hollywood in particular. Gonzo is a touring member of the band Green Jello. If you're old enough, like I am, to remember MTV in the early 90s when they actually played music videos, we all remember Three Little Pigs. But so this particular work here is what is known as glitch art. And glitch art is Gonzo's primary medium, at least insofar as I've come to know of him. And this work is titled Everything is Fine, Nobody is Happy, Bosch's Cleopatra. It is a giclée, or as some people call it, a giclée, print on canvas. Glitch art is considered by some to be a relatively new medium, considered by most really, though here I'll later be making the case that it's actually quite old, at least from a certain point of view. And this image is a glitched distortion of a photo of Hollywood icon Elizabeth Taylor. But before delving into Gonzo's subject here, just a brief explanation on what the glitch art medium is and what it's about. In the 21st century, we all know what glitches are, though it seems no one knows how old the word is or how it really inserted itself into the language. But so prior to the word glitch, the other word that was more well known was a sort of demi-personification of a glitch. And it's been around a long time and would have been something more people would have been familiar with in terms of malfunctioning technology. The word gremlin, gremlins and glitch from a modern folklore perspective are basically synonyms. And what both mean is that things have, are, or will go wrong. Things have, were, or will always go awry. And so what we're seeing now in the early 21st century is the rise of an art form steeped in an aesthetic of malfunctioning technology. Gonzo's work is exploring this because even the idea of malfunctioning technology can then be sort of correlated with other things that can malfunction. And there are all different kinds of ways glitch art can be produced, and that is simply because there are so many ways in which things can go wrong. There's no one way or no right way to make this kind of art. But the kind I'm most familiar with would be, how it's typically made would be by manipulating a digital file, for example. Changing the source code of that digital file, like a JPEG or a bitmap, and changing the file type and opening them in something like Photoshop, for example, and further manipulating the image. That's just a basic explanation of some really incredible things that artists can do with the literal source code, the literal digital information of images. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that glitch artists are experimenting and coming up with new aesthetics. And so it's certainly not a form of art that is confined to canvas prints. And though the glitch art is steeped in an aesthetic of technology going bad, what it represents goes much, much deeper, both in terms of the physical realm of phenomenal reality, as well as the realms of the noumena, the realms of what one might consider the spiritual mysteries. And while Gonzo's work explores the medium of glitch art, this one work in particular of Gonzo's runs very, very deep, and I want to get into it. We are in an era where we're seeing many things that for generations had been held as constant certainties. Those things are beginning to stumble and fall. They're breaking down. It's not just computers or technology that breaks down. It's social constructs. It's cultural paradigms. It's economic operating systems. And I'll include organized Orthodox religions under a lot of that, including economic operating systems, because that's essentially what they are in my country. They're tax shelters for cosplaying wizards. It's an economic scheme. Well, they all go bad for one reason or another too. And part of the irony in that, though, is that we are technologically entranced creatures, at least in our culture. Maybe not so in all human cultures. There are other human cultures who are not seduced by technology, but we are in our culture and have been conditioned or seduced by mechanical things for a long time. And it's not just our Western culture. This occurs in the Middle Eastern cultures and Eastern cultures as well. And the irony is the social and cultural constructs are breaking down because of technological innovation and unforeseen consequences of technology working as it was designed to. And that's an important twist here to the glitch reality at this juncture in time. So it's almost as if we're being told the universal design, if it is a conscious design, operates under the assumption that it was flawed and fucked up to begin with. In fact, this is a very old idea, one that was swept under the rug by emerging cults of orthodoxy 2000 to 1700 years ago, give or take. But of course, the universe might not be a conscious design at all. If we want to run on the idea that material observable reality is all there is, it doesn't change the fact that the universe still operates as if it is flawed and fucked up to begin with. And so through this technological lens, we are seeing how those sociological and cultural and economic constants, or alleged constants, are also full of paradox and contradictions. Essentially, these edifices of culture are teeming with gremlins or glitches. Just as a VHS tape corrodes over time, so can cultures, and certainly so can religions. This all flies in the face of Orthodox tradition that runs on the assumption that our universe is the creations of some perfect, omnipotent, all-powerful creator God figure. In fact, we're seeing what the ancients saw. If the universe and our reality was a creation by a higher entity, it was a creation by a lesser or even stupid entity or creator whose creation is flawed. Its code is flawed, the source code. Again, not a new idea. Only the flawed source code metaphor is new. The idea very likely goes back clear into the Bronze Age. And so what we are seeing in real time, a quarter through the 21st century, is an observation that the mystics of very old spiritual traditions had discussed and written about, and in what has been called their heresies by Orthodox institutions, early church fathers, for example, or what also has been referred to by who I would consider the truly enlightened ones who have come in their wake as their wisdom tradition. The fact that ancient wisdom traditions are considered heresy that in itself is a glitch in our reality. In the West, we are given Judeo-Christian orthodoxy in place of wisdom. There is an underlying foundational truth regarding the essence of reality itself, something that Gonzo's art explores, something that this new medium of glitch art is very much putting front and center into the imaginations of everyone who sees it. And glitch art, more than any other medium, just through the medium itself, is calling attention to some mystical facts. That everything in the material universe that we are enmeshed in, everything from our technology to our sociological and cultural constructs, to even our own very own finite organic lives, it's all destined to break down, corrode, and eventually cease to be, because the universe's design was far from perfect. In fact, some might even go so far as to call it a mistake. At best, the universe could be described as an accident. And a lot of glitch art also comes by way of accidents. You can see a lot of this on the glitch art subreddit, for example. But this idea of a flawed reality, this is one of the central tenets of Gnosticism, the Demiurge, a concept which essentially acts as one of the four pillars of the Gnosticism we are familiar with today of the past 2,000 years. The concept of the Demiurge was really established by Plato, who referred to a benevolent, or at worst indifferent, artificer of all creation in the Timaeus. A few centuries later, the Neo-Pythagoreans and the Neoplatonists kind of resurrected this idea, and the Gnostics, who were greatly influenced by the Neo-Pythagoreans and the Neoplatonists in particular, certain Gnostic sects were anyway, it was they who really put the final polish on this conceptualization of creation, the flawed creation. And so Gnosticism today is very much colored by early non-Orthodox Christianity. It takes on the symbols and parables of what most people would recognize as Christianity, albeit a heretical form of it. Many Christian Gnostics in history would be accused of many different kinds of things. One of the first accusations of people practicing a form of Satanism was an early church father, Irenaeus, who did not like the Gnostics and who accused the Carpocratian Marcellina and her followers of this practice, that they were essentially being led by some sort of satanic agenda, when in fact Carpocratians were Christians, just a different kind of Christians. The Carpocratians were very hippie adjacent for their time. That's another story. But in reality, these ideas, they likely go back to the Bronze Age philosophies and spiritual traditions, originating out of Egypt in particular, and who knows, perhaps even back into the late Stone Ages. But the idea or concept of an all-perfect monotheistic creator deity in the Judeo-Christian tradition, relatively speaking, that's a new kid on the block insofar as spirituality goes. And so the Gnostics of the 1st and 2nd century would have viewed this meme of Jehovah that their new cult of Christians were upholding as a demiurge figure. And in centuries to come, they'd be persecuted for that. But another of the 4 pillars in the Gnostic tradition is the notion of a divine feminine figure, one who becomes enmeshed in the material world, trapped and subjected to the horrors and realities of a world based on animal impulses. And in the Gnostic traditions, that figure has a name, Sophia. This is a metaphor for wisdom itself. The name Sophia is a central concept in Hellenistic philosophical traditions and spiritual traditions, everything from Platonism to Christianity to Gnosticism. And its literal meaning in Koine Greek is wisdom. And I chose this image of Sophia for a few reasons. First of all, I have absolutely no idea where this comes from. I don't know the artist. I don't know where it originally appeared. The fact is, there are not a lot of depictions of Sophia. Before medieval times, within a Gnostic context, prior to Christianity's consolidation post-Constantine, there might be some, I just don't know of them. It's not like I'm looking for them every day. But I really like this image because it encapsulates pretty much everything you need to know. And also it appears to be somewhat, at least sort of reminiscent of glitch art. But circling back to Gonzo's work now, everything is fine, nobody is happy, Bosch's Cleopatra glitch. Through its medium, it calls attention to the mystic's understanding of reality on one hand, but on the other, it also makes a statement about this divine feminine figure, Sophia, and what she has to teach us through the myths recounting her experiences. Correlations and analogies can be made to the concept of this principle of the divine feminine coming out of the wisdom traditions, born out of the Mediterranean regions, Egypt and Greece primarily, in the myths of human imagination, but perhaps also in some figures from history and pop culture. Through the Gnostics' understanding, all symbolic representations in history and mythology and art, they are all avatars of this Gnostic principle of the divine feminine as embodied in the Sophia character. And in remaining in touch with the wisdom that the divine feminine harbors, we remain in touch with the reality that everything, particularly the technology we use, in one way or another, it's all destined to break down because there is something suspect in the nature of reality itself. Things go wrong. And so in Gonzo's image, we have not Cleopatra, but the idea of Cleopatra through the famous iconic figure who would play Cleopatra in a famous iconic Hollywood production. If I'm not mistaken, I think Elizabeth Taylor was the first actress to command $1 million payday to do the film, thanks to some shrewd negotiating, sort of mirroring the namesake of the film, who was also known as a shrewd and skilled negotiator and diplomat. And so the figure of the Hellenistic Macedonian Ptolemaic queen of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, is interesting within the context of this exegesis, primarily because she existed at a time when a 300-year-long dynasty was breaking down. At the time of Cleopatra, the social order was experiencing some major glitches. Egypt at the time was a Macedonian Greek kingdom after Alexander the Great had conquered it some 300 years or so earlier, and when he died, all the lands that were conquered by him were split up by his generals, and his general Ptolemy wound up with Egypt and established a dynasty that Cleopatra VII was essentially the last sovereign of, because Ptolemaic Egypt would be annexed by the emerging Roman Empire. So a breakdown of the existing order is present in Gonzo's title. Now, Elizabeth Taylor, on the other hand, as a figure of pop culture and a Hollywood icon, she might easily be the first person in line to tell you about how things occur that aren't planned, how systems break down, how facades are not even skin deep, how the glitz and glamour of celebrity is riddled with curses, how there are glitches in the system. Taylor, of course, was famously dragged through tabloids beginning at a very early age, as she'd go through one failed marriage to another. Cleopatra the Queen was thrust onto the throne as the sole ruler of Egypt at 18, just as Taylor was thrown into a celebrity marriage at 18, one in which she suffered physical abuse. And all of Taylor's marriages would end for one reason or another. One of her marriages ended because he died in a plane crash. I mean, speaking philosophically, in a perfect system of creation, would a benevolent, loving, omnipotent creator God allow plane crashes? No. But if that creator was a lesser emanation from the original source, a stupid emanation, an entity whose knowledge is less than perfect, such a stupid entity thinking it was all-powerful and the crown jewel of all there was, is, or will be, that kind of entity might create a system that allows plane crashes, among other things. This is how the ancient Gnostics explained the imperfection, the glitchiness of reality. It is the principle of the divine feminine in this cosmogony that can serve to help liberate the human from such archonic existential realities. But of course, in helping humanity, the principality of the divine feminine suffers. Elizabeth Taylor certainly suffered. She was probably in a tabloid every week of her life, beginning when she was just a teenager, and working as a woman in the, let's face it, Hollywood is certainly a hedonist industry that draws Dionysian elements. It's not an industry for the faint of heart, needless to say. So though I don't feel Hollywood is evil, it certainly attracts a lot of people not savvy in the ways of professional integrity, and also criminals and criminal deviant behavior. And by the way, Taylor wasn't an angel either. She was by no means a paragon of virtue from a spiritual sense. She had her own libido, as did Cleopatra. But they're human, and libido is part of being human. It's a blessing and a curse. But Taylor was also thrust into the limelight and sexualized very early on, and then turned into tabloid fodder for the rest of her life. So any human mistakes she made, and she made them, she certainly would have paid for them. And in the distortion of the image, in the glitch, Gonzo also reflects a psychedelic reality. And this is also important when we're talking wisdom traditions and the divine feminine. I don't feel this is the place to discuss certain phenomena that occurs within the house of the imagination when certain psychedelics are consumed, but I think those who've undergone these initiations can understand why a principle like the divine feminine is intertwined with psychedelia. And all of Gonzo's work has a psychedelic quality, But in this image, the psychedelic quality to the image is really driven home when we have this embodiment of the tortured divine feminine principle. In fact, much like how the divine feminine or the Sophia figure in various Gnostic traditions is subjected to various manifestations of a fall from a higher aeon to that of a lower aeon and the degradations that come with it, the image of portrait or tailor itself is tortured in the way that it is distorted for the purpose of glitch art. And herein lies one of the poetic lessons and takeaways to glitch art. There's nothing that happened to this original image that won't happen to our physical bodies. Glitches, breakdowns, system failures, they're part of the fabric of a flawed universe, and there's no getting around it. And so the final element to this work is the statement, everything is fine, nobody is happy, printed across the eyes of the representational divine feminine in the image. This is a slogan that has been popularized in recent years, one which really doesn't have an origin point I'm aware of. So how I interpret this would be as a realization to the hollowness and emptiness and sometimes even futility of material reality, of the economic order that has been welded onto it, and how void of meaning that is as well, the superficiality of it all. Hollywood is sometimes considered a beacon of that kind of mindset, and sometimes for good reason. And we have incredible technology. It makes existence that much more okay when we consider the jungle that we're surrounded by all of the time. But look how that technology itself is destined to break down, or how it might be used in ways it wasn't intended, or even if it is used how it was intended, how it brings about unintended consequences. These things together, they're almost like a sentient creation that is just tortured and suffers just by being brought into existence itself. And these cultural constructs and the technology born out of it is like some hydra begging for someone or something to come along, put it out of its misery. Yeah, I'm thinking of like a guy's head in a vice whose eye has just popped out of his head as he's being tortured in a Scorsese film, begging for his torturers to just kill him already. I mean, look what we do with our technology. We stick people's heads in vices. But the slogan here is covering the divine feminine's eyes. And if you look at the original photo, you can almost read that same slogan in Elizabeth Taylor's eyes. So Gonzo's work here is constellating many different aspects of both material reality and immateriality. And this is the genius of the work and the genius of glitch art as a medium. It appears in music and various other visual arts going back into the late 20th century. A band like Radiohead has and continues to play with the concept of glitch art in both its musical, lyrical, and visual aesthetics. It's been experimented with by people like Kanye West, and we see glitch aesthetics as narrative aids used in films. And it's also being used by people who are working within another new emerging medium of narrative art, that of postmodern technological-based horror folklore. According to legend, very evil things happen if you watch this particular Japanese commercial at midnight. It all seems to be pointing to the anxieties people have, which are not new. Anxieties of feeling confined by a bloodthirsty void of an imperfect reality, where we're born to suffer, experience glitches. I mean, toothaches and backaches, those are various forms of glitches that can and will occur in our matrix. And we can construct relatively predictable societies and cultures and carve little niches out for us in them where we will feel okay, a little bit secure for a little while, but inevitably things will go wrong. The best case scenario is that nature will take its course. That's not a reassuring predicament either when we keep in mind everything that can happen in nature. You know anyone who suffers from Alzheimer's? So even our cultural constructs are riddled with flaws, even when they're working as they're supposed to. Even something like the cultural construct of language, for example, it's something confined and subject to contradictions and paradox. This was something Lewis Carroll was very consciously playing around with when he wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The English language is full of glitches that can easily devolve into chaos, and we see politicians play word games all of the time. It's also something Wittgenstein would identify as the language game in his philosophy. And this image here, this is not an example of glitch art, but it is an illustration that comes from the same place of or being in touch with the same knowledge that glitch artists and glitch art, where it springs from. And so people think that all is paradox and contradiction in a seething sea of chaos, save for math. The reason of mathematics certainty is the only bedrock of truth and certainty. There is no paradox and contradiction in math. But then you watch a documentary like Dangerous Knowledge, which gets into how some of the most sophisticated mathematical minds would suffer from insanity, either in part or simply because they studied mathematics too deep, and came to the realization that even math has its paradoxes and contradictions. Even math has glitches. Wittgenstein's work was a work of ration and reason. Wittgenstein was an Apollonian. There is no divine feminine in such works. The mathematicians who discovered glitches in what was supposed to be a perfect system of ration and reason, they're also Apollonians. And some people who are attached to the Apollonian frame of mind don't always handle paradox and contradiction well. A Dionysian like Carroll, however, he had fun with it, bittersweet as that fun is. And in his Wonderland, a reflection of our reality, there is a divine feminine principle who becomes enmeshed and trapped in a world that doesn't make sense, but who is capable of mitigating and perhaps even ameliorating the glitch reality of paradox and contradiction. And so we come back to the wordplay in Gonzo's glitch, and the line, "everything is fine, nobody is happy," is manifold depending on the context you wish to see it. As for myself, I see it as a reminder that through the flaws in the material universe, there still exists that ameliorating principle of the element of the enmeshed divine feminine that is also present. That's just me. Could be interpreted in other ways that are just as valid. But either way you might choose or not choose to interpret glitch art, glitch artists, some of them, do seem to have an inherent knack of being able to pierce through the veil. Gonzo's glitch is one that also happens to be hinting at other principalities in play besides the glitched reality. One that might be hinting at the Dionysian spirit, the ameliorating faculties of the principles of the divine feminine, which is the place where art and mythology springs forth from. To close, but keeping a figure like Cleopatra in mind in particular, and how social orders are as prone to break down as technology, let's look at another form of glitch art, a loose form of it. These works were not produced to be representations of faults their societies produced, or to promote the fact that reality is subject to glitch. In fact, they were produced to represent the very opposite. They're meant to represent a submission by the chaos to a human order. And nor would I refer to the defacers of these works glitch artists. But in the field of time, we can see them as glitch art. We see the glitches. That order represented by the original monument was only an illusion. It broke down. And sometimes those orders, just as certain monuments break down, crack, and crumble, those orders end simply because of accidents that occur in time, unforeseen glitches in the matrix. The point is, in the end, the chaos that the glitches are essentially little emissaries of in this manifest existence, the chaos always wins in the end. So ancient statuary and steles, they're full of evidence that pre-existing social orders and constructs, they have, and they all will break down. And we don't always know why. But we do know that it happened. And this one here is interesting given the subject matter. You see how of the two Egyptian figures pictured, someone really went to a lot of trouble to really deface the divine feminine figure of Isis when compared to her male counterpart in the temple carving here. I don't know if the male figure is meant to be a deity or a demigod as well. It looks like he's probably a pharaoh. But what they did to Isis, I mean, it comes across like a modern example of glitch art, but it also illustrates to me just how much orthodoxy despises the principle of the divine feminine and the wisdom principle she bears. We can possibly assume it was Orthodox Christians who defaced this temple because you see the Coptic cross carved in the rock face, in the face of the temple as well. So a variation of glitch art has been around for a long time, but glitch art is also the new frontier. I don't think we've even begun to scratch the surface in how it will be used in the future as new technologies develop and new ideas are born as to how such technological processes can and will break down. And we are, as the hashtag says, the humans of late capitalism. Systems collapse, systems break down, and evidence or artifacts of future events, breakdowns of the future surround us at all times. In spite of the Hollywood polish we're all presented with, under the surface of it all, gremlins lurk. I understand that there may even be a reboot of the Spielberg-produced, Joe Dante-directed Gremlins film, or a sequel, who knows. If it happens, I just hope they utilize glitch aesthetics in the film's narrative. But going back to the artifacts of the past, I mentioned the Bronze Age earlier. The end of the Bronze Age is something we should all be paying attention to here and now in the Plastic Age. A whole network of civilizations and cultures that had been operating in a fairly efficient trade network for hundreds and hundreds of years. At the end of the Bronze Age, it all just collapsed, relatively overnight. But what this particular piece of glitch art by Gonzo, what it serves to remind me of, is the fact that as the divine wisdom of the aeons reminds us that there will always be malfunctions, gremlins living in the technology, glitches in the matrix, there is still wisdom to be found even in these realities, revelations about the true nature of reality, and perhaps even revelations about how future generations would do well to actually learn from history for once, rather than erect social constructs and cultural constructs that fly in the face of the bedrock truth that all material existence is horrifically flawed, and instead erect social and cultural constructs that are designed to contour themselves in line with the inevitable. Oh, and one last thing. Remember when I said Gonzo will be touring with Green Jello? In 2021, Green Jello released its first record in some time under the Cleopatra label. That, in fact, might explain the glitch art's subject. In which case, forget everything I've just said.